This guy's hurling on the ground, and the Geiger counter next to him's going crazy. Someone's taken aback, finds their hands covered in dust. They glance back, radiation hits them. People freak out instantly, running like zombies. Meanwhile, chaos reigns in the supermarket. Food and water are the hot commodities. Traffic's at a standstill. Everyone's trying to bail before the radiation hits, but it only adds to the panic. Even the doctors are on strike. The culprit behind this disaster is both natural and man-made. There was an earthquake in the city recently, reported as only a 6.1, so no one paid it much mind. But George, a nuclear plant worker, sensed trouble. He urged his colleagues to suit up. They thought he was overreacting, yet the disaster had already struck. The valve of Reactor 1 cracked, leaking cooling water. Changing the valve in time could have stopped the leak, but congressmen feared bad publicity, choosing to conceal the truth unanimously, and warned the plant not to inform its staff directly. So, the plant brought in a few temporary workers to weld the valve. The workers closed the valve for convenience, increasing pressure in the pipes. The manager suddenly realizes the reactor's melting down. High temperatures produce tons of hydrogen. Without urgent venting, the whole reactor will blow. At this critical moment, the politicians were more concerned about nationwide panic affecting their votes due to gas spreading. So they misled the president, claiming they had evacuated nearby residents and the issue would soon be resolved. But in reality, only a small village nearby was evacuated. It was labeled as a fire drill. Inside the nuclear plant, panic ensued. George and his co-workers witnessed the severity and planned an emergency evacuation, but they found the only exit locked by upper management. George bypassed controls, activated manual mode, and took charge. Then he forcefully turned valves. Hope was near, but time was running out. When George regained consciousness, it was a hellish scene. His jovial co-workers from the previous day were unrecognizable. Suppressing grief, he cleared rubble to save lives. With help, he and some injured managed to leave the nuclear plant. But being closest to the reactor, they suffered severe radiation and were isolated as contaminants. The ward echoed with agonizing cries, painkillers offering little relief. Doctors could only use cold water to lower their temperatures, yet its effect was minimal. Meanwhile, the evacuated populace learned the truth. They refused to wait for death. But an icy gate blocked their escape. Behind it stood armed police. They too were considered contaminants. That night, several water cannons surrounded the nuclear plant to cool the reactor and prevent a secondary explosion. But then the plant manager noticed some fire trucks leaving. Upon inquiry, they were headed to refill the freshwater reservoir. The manager stormed into the control room, questioning why they weren't using seawater for cooling. Despite being by the sea, upper management cited corporate directives. Using seawater would render the entire reactor unusable.
원자로 한기가 얼마짜리인지 모르세요? 잘못되면 소장님이 책임지실 겁니까? 내가 책임진다!
The plant manager ordered the rescue team to draw seawater for cooling. However, firefighters informed him that their superiors also prohibited them from using seawater. The manager suddenly realized how insignificant ordinary lives were to those Korean officials' AEUR, a mere number, utterly debased. Meanwhile, the council was informed that a pool holding 400 tons of nuclear waste had sprung a leak. Once exposed to the air, the radiation equaled 2 atomic bombs exploding overhead. Simultaneously, the isolated individuals discovered guards quietly evacuating, but refusing to open the iron gate. They were left to fend for themselves blatantly. Everyone grew furious. Together, they pushed down the iron gate and commandeered a few buses, floored the accelerator and sped away. But upon hitting the highway, they found it blocked. They had to proceed on foot. Meanwhile, the president finally ordered the rescue team to draw seawater to cool the reactor. Yet a more significant problem loomed ahead of them. The water level in the nuclear waste pool was nearing the warning line. The only remedy was sending people into the plant to seal the cracks. But the leaking coolant was knee-deep. No one could survive such high radiation levels. In desperation, the president publicly admitted fault on the news, begging the surviving workers to return and mend the cracks in the waste pool. The workers were angry. "You're responsible for this disaster, not us. We did nothing wrong. Yet here you are, living fine, while we're on death's doorstep." But soon they realized EUR, not going is death, going is death. Besides, they had families waiting outside. Soon everyone donned thick protective suits. But amidst such intense radiation, these suits were merely psychological reassurances. They were also given a bottle of painkillers to ease their pain as they approached the end of their lives. In a queue, they entered the nuclear plant. Rescue workers on both sides bowed their heads, paying tribute to these unsung heroes. George silently turned, gazing up at the sky. He knew this was it. Led by the manager, they started sealing the cracks. But suddenly, the cracks widened. High radiation coolant poured down. they failed. Upon hearing this news, the president's eyes reddened. Nothing could be salvaged. But just as they prepared to evacuate, George suddenly stopped them. Since the cracks couldn't be fixed, he suggested blowing up the ceiling to create a new reservoir below. Time was short. Welding the door shut had to happen simultaneously with planting explosives. This meant someone would stay behind forever. Among them, George was the one to set the explosives. Yet while others hesitated, George was already there. Before leaving, he asked his colleagues if they believed they would go to heaven after death, but all he got in response were sobs. George said, "Then I'll take the first step. Take your time." As the iron door closed, George began placing the explosives. His co-workers, despite their grief, welded the door seams. Once the installation was done, George consumed all remaining painkillers, yet they had no effect. But the manager begged him to hold on a little longer because the door seams weren't entirely welded. At that moment, George noticed the camera on his helmet. With the president's help, his blood-streaked face appeared on television, while his family watched from the other end. In his final moments, he apologized to his mother for being a disobedient son, for always making her angry from a young age, unable to make it right now. He urged his mother to live a long and happy life and come to him joyfully. Then he apologized to his sister-in-law for her tireless work managing the household and caring for their elderly mother since his brother's death, and for looking after their mischievous nephew. He was always grateful but never said it until now, just because he was too proud to admit it until today. Lastly, he comforted his girlfriend not to be mad at him, saying if given a chance, even if just for a day, he'd choose to be with her, spending the remaining time peacefully. As he spoke, he cried like a child, releasing all the accumulated grievances and fears from deep within. He didn't really want to be this hero, but he had no choice. Meanwhile, the external lockdown was completed. His co-workers reluctantly evacuated, leaving George alone. Trembling, he unlocked the safety, then pressed the button. When the smoke cleared, the president asked the manager about the person who went inside. The manager informed him that there was no chance of survival. Not long after, all the workers involved in the rescue succumbed to radiation. The president presided over their memorial service, yet no matter how they tried to portray it, the agony of nuclear contamination lingered in everyone's hearts. There's Chernobyl's 1986 disaster in the past, and more recently, Fukushima's ocean release of contaminated water. Prior to this, there had never been an instance of releasing contaminated water. Radioactive materials will spread throughout the Pacific and eventually reach global waters. It's claimed that some of the carbon-14 remains hazardous for thousands of years. The decay of certain specific elements requires tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years. What's even more chilling is the ocean discharge might last for 30 years.